Welcome to the Score Studios for our NBA Draft Preview Show. I'm Joseph Casciaro. That's Matthew Winnick. Winnick is one of our resident college experts here at the Score, so we're going to tap into his knowledge to talk about what looks like a mediocre draft at best. I mean, everyone who's anyone in prospect scouting calls it the worst draft class in at least 11 years. And for people that don't remember what class that was when Anthony Bennett went number 1 overall. So not a lot of people high on this draft. I asked 2 scouts who I've made contacts with over the years covering the NBA about this class, and I asked them if it's as bad as advertised, straight up. One texted me back saying worse, but the other one told me that he actually thinks it's mostly just the top of the draft that's really, really bad in comparison to other years. Like the guys that are in contention for the number 1 pick this year are probably like 8 to 10 picks in most years, but after that, it's actually a very standard draft. So Matt, you know a lot more about college ball and prospects than a lot of us do. So you tell me, what do you think? If I asked you that same question, is it as bad as advertised? Is it maybe getting too much hate? What do you think?
Honestly, I think your scouts are probably bang on. It's a combination of the two, right? The draft is not a deep draft, even though there's a lot of role players. But the biggest flaw in the draft is stars. If you're a team picking near the top, normally you're looking for someone who can be a franchise cornerstone moving forward. There might not be any of those guys in this year's draft. But if you're a team picking in the lottery, maybe mid-lottery, where you're looking for a piece to put you over the top, get into the playoffs next year, maybe win a round, then there's some hope here. You can find someone who can maybe be an off-ball shooter or a lockdown defender or a rim protector. But if you're looking for that superstar, you're probably going to need to wait another year or two to really get that guy into your program.
Yeah, there's no franchise changes
Definitely
in this
not.
draft, or at least it doesn't look like
No.
there is. Guys at the top, pretty consensus seems to be one of Sarr, Rizache going 1 and 2, maybe Reed Shepard in 3. We can talk more about your mock draft later and talk about some of those guys. But I feel like people have heard those names for the most part. We talk about how this draft might actually be all right once you get past the top guys. So who are some of the names maybe people aren't talking about enough, or guys that are well-known names but you still think are sleepers that could have an impact beyond what people think they could?
Yeah, I think the first name that comes to mind is Isaiah Collier, and he was the number 1 rated high school recruit getting into college this year from ESPN. And he played for a USC team that had a lot of expectations, a really talented roster, and obviously Bronny James was on that team, so they got a lot of TV coverage, and they were not very good. They went 15 and 17. Collier had a ton of turnover problems. His shooting was pretty erratic. He had a hand injury where he missed a few games in the middle of the season. But if you look historically at guards, especially that were top 5, top 10 high school recruits that had, productive seasons. Collier still averaged 16 points and 4 assists on 44% shooting from the field. You go down in the past 10 years, guys that have put up those numbers in college as, top recruits with a great pedigree, they've all been top 10 picks, every single one. And that list includes De'Aaron Fox, that list includes RJ Barrett, that list even includes Kyrie Irving. And although Collier does not have the same all-around game as some of those guys do, we're talking about a guy that's projected in the middle of the lottery, and he has the talent of someone in this draft. If he hits, he's one of the guys that has star potential because he's a 6'4" guard, great frame, gets to the basket. The shot isn't broken; it just needs a little bit of refinement. I think that's someone who should probably be going higher in a draft like this. And number 2 would be Zach Edey. He's been talked about a ton, back-to-back, a national player of the year, 7'4" big man, one of the biggest players to enter the NBA in years. But everyone's concerned about the defense. He's not super fast on his feet, but he did impress at the combine. He was not a complete zero. And then the difference is the shot, right? If he can become even a respectable three-point shooter, we're talking 33, 35%, where defenses aren't going to completely sag in the paint, then offensively, he has everything you need from a modern 5 where he's so dominant down low and he can stretch a defense out. And Brook Lopez is a comp that you get a lot, and I think that makes a ton of sense in terms of what his career can become. Number 3, someone who's probably going late first round is Tristan Da Silva from Colorado. He's a 6'8" wing. He shot 40% from 3. He can put the ball on the floor. He's a decent enough defender, pretty athletic. Someone who I like to compare him to is coming out of Utah, Kyle Kuzma, someone who has that tweener 3-4 size, great shooter. And then the upside, where I think that he has the ability to put the ball on the floor, be an average defender, be an impact player on a winning team where you need a 3 or a 4 guy who can come in space around shooters. And then the last 2 guys, both second round, maybe undrafted guys, who sort of reminded me of guys that flourished in this year's playoffs. Tristan Newton was the starting point guard for UConn's back-to-back national title team, which hasn't been done in years. And he's a pure passer, but at 6'4", he has the ability to sort of play off ball in the way that Andrew Nembhard did with the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs, alongside Tyrese Halliburton, where he was able to hit that open three. He was able to provide secondary playmaking. And then when Halliburton went out, you saw that he does have those point guard skills that made Nembhard a great player in college at Gonzaga. And I think that Tristan Newton's ability to do both will allow him to carve a role in the NBA. He's also 23 years old, so there's not a lot of development needed there. And then lastly would be Arizona's Pele Larson, who has played for some awesome Arizona teams. He's a wing guy who can shoot the ball over 40% from three. And when you look at Derek White on the Celtics, he's a connector piece, right? He's hitting threes when star players have the ball in their hands. He's able to play defensively at 6'5" with a long wingspan and athletic enough where he can switch onto a bigger guy if he has to. Players that can hit threes are big enough defensively with, positional versatility. Those are guys that I'm looking for that, we saw with the Celtics, if you can dribble, pass, shoot with good positional size, you're going to be just fine in the NBA.
That's why we brought him here. I told you he was a resident expert on college hoops and prospects. But no, I think a couple interesting things there. One, in terms of the last two guys you mentioned and kind of fitting the mold of role players. Derek White, I think, is probably better than a role, but he's like a star role player. He's elite in his role, but I agree with you in terms of their teams are always looking for those guys, and especially after a playoff run where like a couple of those guys pop, they're looking for those elite role player type players who can come in, fill a role, know that they're not going to be stars, know that they're not going to dominate the ball, and don't expect to, but can fill their role. And those roles are very important, especially on playoff teams. And so that's why those guys also make sense in the middle to late first round or in the second round, because it's teams that are ready to win now, more contending teams that aren't looking for a franchise savior. They're looking for a solid seventh man or a fifth starter to come in and just complete the puzzle. In terms of Edey, I think it's hilarious. I agree with you that he's a sleeper, but it's hilarious that the two-time reigning National Player of the Year is a sleeper. But it's true because I think the narrative went so far and the consensus on him went so far the other way that he went from maybe someone who only watches college and like doesn't realize how his game will translate. Maybe they would have overrated him and they would have said, oh, this guy's going to be a superstar. And no, he won't. But I think the consensus has shifted too far the other way where he had become underrated. The two-time reigning National Player of the Year had become underrated from an NBA prospect perspective because, yes, look, he's not going to – he was good at the combine, but he's not going to move his feet great laterally. If he gets stuck defending on an island, on the perimeter, on a switch, he's going to get cooked because look how big he is. Right. But that sheer size, 7'11", almost wingspan.
7'10", yeah.
Almost 7'4" without shoes. His sheer size is going to be a deterrent on the defensive end, is going to protect the rim. In the right drop scheme, in a certain amount of minutes, I think he's going to be fine defensively. I don't think he'll be great defensively because of how versatile you need to be great defensively in the modern NBA, but I think he'll be fine on the offensive end. He's got nice touch for his size. His footwork on the offensive end actually isn't bad. He's good from that floater range. Whether the range can extend is the big thing, but as we were talking about off air, we're talking about a guy 70% plus free throw shooter in college. That usually translates. Usually if a guy is a solid free throw shooter, it means the form is there. It means there's some upside there. And with NBA development, he can shoot. Also, this guy's got a track record of rapid skill development. He did not start playing basketball till he was like 15, 16. Mm-hmm. And look where he is now by, 21, 22. Yep. There's a track record of rapid skill development. The shooting, just one thing I wanted to note. So, I'm talking about 70% free throw shooter in college. I don't think people understand the volume we're talking about here, okay?
They do not.
So, 71% free throw shooter. The gap between his NCAA leading 436 free throw attempts and the player with the second most attempts was equivalent to the gap between that second-ranked guy in free throw attempts and the 88th ranked player. Yeah. So to be 71% at his size on that volume, I think bodes well for his shooting, career in the NBA. Again, he's not going to be a 40% shoot, but can he be a guy that keeps defenses that makes defenses respect him out there? I think he can. And he'll create a lot of threes.
No,
for teammates as well with his vertical spacing, his interior spacing. Okay, on the note about shooting, shooting's invaluable in the NBA. We know almost every player needs to be able to shoot if they don't do something else at an extremely elite level. Who are the shooters in this draft class that you think are NBA-ready shooters? Teams are just foaming at the mouth to get them in their programs.
The best shooter in the draft, and I don't think it's really that much of a debate, is Reed Sheppard. He shot over 52% from three in his freshman season at Kentucky. The only player in the 2000s that has put up his points per game, his assists per game, and shooting over 40% from three was Chris Paul at Wake Forest, and he was at 44%. Sheppard at 52 is just a crazy gap. And in this draft, with how weak it is, if Sheppard was even an average-sized guard, he would be the first pick, and I don't think it would be that much of a debate. He's really undersized, and where he fits in the NBA is perhaps a question. But when you have someone who has been one of the most elite shooting prospects in terms of production at the college level going into the NBA, you're going to have to take a chance on him at some point in the top 10, probably top 5. Rob Dillingham is a different type of shooter who played with Reed Sheppard at Kentucky. He's the type of guy that is going to score off the dribble, and he can pull up. He can hit that open three. He was per synergy efficient at all three levels, shooting the basketball short, mid, and long, off the dribble, off the catch. He reminds me a lot of a former Kentucky guy, Tyrese Maxey, offensively. Defensively, he's way smaller. He has tiny shoulders. That's going to be a big problem. That's why he's falling in a lot of mocks to the late lottery, even in the 20s. But offensively, you put the ball in his hands, and he's going to be successful because of his ability to shoot that basketball. Jared McCain at Duke. He's a popular social media personality, so he already has a lot of prestige behind his name. When I watch him play, every single shot he takes, he has the exact same form. And he's an excellent shooter when he catches that ball off of the dribble, off of movement. He always has the same form. He's always under control, and the numbers back it up. He was over 40% from three as an undersized freshman at Duke in a power conference. So I think that he will be an excellent off-ball spacing threat for whoever picks him late lottery, early 20s. I just mentioned Pele Larson, over 40%. And his free throw numbers were all in over 80% all 4 seasons in college. He's the type of guy that, with his size as 6'5", as a wing guy, he will be able to space the floor, but unlike the guys that I just mentioned, will also be able to hang defensively. And then Baylor Shireman, a lefty from Creighton, who played at South Dakota State beforehand in the mid-major ranks, and he's just been an absolute sniper his entire career. He can pull up from, I guess you call it Lillard range, and put him in a system at 6'8", he will be able to play maybe the stretch 4, set some screens, pick and pop, and there's really no one like him in the draft with his size and his deep shooting ability.
Yeah, and you talk about that size, and that is what the concern is with Sheppard, the first guy you mentioned. Like, I love Reed Sheppard. I think he might have the most upside in this draft. I know that sounds crazy, and he doesn't seem like he's in contention for the number 1 pick, but I just think a guy with guard skills like that who can shoot at that level, which is like almost unprecedented.
Yeah.
There's something there. Now, the big concern is that he measured under 6'2" at the combine. And that's where I'm just like, look, I know small guys have made it work before. I don't know if Sheppard has that level of, athleticism and a rounded out game to make up for the size difference. And that's where I'm like, okay, maybe that's another indictment of this draft class where it's like a guy with that type of concern, I'm saying might have the most upside in the class.
The last 2 All-Stars to make the last 2 players make an All-Star team with a standing reach under 7'10", which is where Sheppard is.
6'10", sorry. Oh, 7?
Standing reach under 7'10".
Wow, okay.
The last 2 players to make an All-Star game with that size would be Isaiah Thomas and Kemba Walker. It's been a little while, and they're also like point guard. The point guard is point guard. They have the ball in their hands. They're making plays for others. That's not quite Reed Sheppard's game, so that's where the concern comes.
Yes, and, even Kemba, if you look at what he did in college at UConn. Now, Isaiah Thomas, not to that same level, but Isaiah Thomas was a more explosive scorer.
And he was the last pick.
Yeah.
Not a top 5 guy.
And still, carved out a really good career for himself.
Definitely.
And before he got hurt was, a down ballot NBA, not even down ballot. I think he finished 3rd in MVP voting one year. So there's something there, like I said, for Reed Sheppard, but that size is a concern. Okay, we talked about shooting, which, obviously we talked about the offensive side of the floor, but defense is half the game. So who are some of the guys, maybe not getting enough love because defense never gets the love that it should, but 3 to 5 guys from this class that you think we'll be talking about a year from now as like impactful defensive rookies?
Yeah, Alex Sarr, who might go first overall to the Atlanta Hawks, is the first guy you have to mention. He's not getting drafted for his offense. He's a 7'1", 4'5" guy who really reminds me defensively of Jaren Jackson, someone who was playing the 4 in Memphis alongside Steven Adams, and that worked great. And then when Adams got hurt and he fell down, switched down to the 5, he's a good enough rim protector to make it work. When you're 7 foot and you're really quick and you have good length, you're automatically going to be able to, succeed defensively in the NBA. Chet Holmgren's another example. Sarr's a little bit stronger than Chet Holmgren, but someone who can sort of seamlessly play the 4 and 5 defensively with great length is going to be a piece that you're going to want to have on your team and will immediately help your team defensively and can hide some of the flaws that maybe if he goes to Atlanta that Trae Young has as being a small point guard. And then number 2 would be Donovan Clingan, who also might be a top 3 pick. He was the best rim protector in college basketball. His defensive profile is a lot similar to Walker Kessler, someone who's just a dominant rim protector with great size. I think Clingan might be a little more mobile, and that gives him even more upside defensively than Kessler, who sort of fell out of a favor a little bit in Utah. But he's that same type of player where you're going to get a top 10, 15 rim protector in the NBA. Ron Holland, who might go later in the lottery, is 6'6", extremely athletic, and also has tremendous motor. And that kind of didn't always show. He played for G League Ignite last year, and because the team was historically bad at that level, and he was sort of burdened offensively in a role that he won't be playing in the NBA because that team was so short on talent. I think you put him in the right system, he could probably play up to the 4 if he builds up some strength. And the way that he plays, it's sort of PJ Tucker-esque defensively, especially a slightly younger version, where he's going to get into you and he's going to make your life miserable for 40 minutes. Ryan Dunn at Virginia. Virginia is always known as a defensive program. He put up defensive stats in terms of blocks and steals that haven't been seen by a power conference player since Matisse Thybulle, who was obviously drafted for his defense. Yeah. The difference is Dunn played in a really laid-back system where he wasn't even supposed to be getting these steals. He's extremely long. Thybulle is probably his best comp defensively, but also Thybulle is also his best comp offensively, where
that's a problem.
He's a non-shooter. Yeah. He was even worse than Thybulle. He was below 60% from the free throw line, not a three-point shooter. You're hearing a lot of him very early second round just because if a team can unlock that offense, boom, he is absolutely a rotation player in the NBA if that shot doesn't come around. And then a deep sleeper at number 5, Jonathan Mobo, who played at San Francisco, late bloomer in basketball. He's mostly a rim finisher now. He's only 6'7". Defensively, he reminds me a lot of someone like Precious Achiuwa, who doesn't get a lot of love because of the offense is kind of a mess. And Mobo, it might be as well, but he can play the 5. He's really strong, really long arms over a 7-foot wingspan. And if he's able to, develop some ball skills, I think that the ability to play him at the 4 and the 5 as sort of someone who can switch out to guards if he gets in a switching scheme is someone who I think can be really valuable as potentially a late second rounder undrafted guy.
You mentioned Clingan. I mean, I think Clingan's just going to be like a solid big man for a long time. I really like him, and I think that he's he's more versatile than Edey is, and I think that's a big difference too. I know, there's a lot made of both those guys because they matched up in the national championship game, and I think Clingan's just going to be like a solid big for a long time. In terms of Sarr, I think it's funny because I think he actually would fit perfectly with Trae Young. Even on the offensive end, he would help protect him on the defensive end. But offensively, I think he'd pair so well with a pick-and-roll maestro like Trae Young on the other end of those pick-and-rolls as like a roller, a finisher, a lob threat. But it's just that offensive side of the ball for Sarr is such a question mark to me. Like, I know at one point earlier in the season, I saw some people calling like, oh, he's like baby Giannis light. And I was like, no, there's no way. Like, I know that he can put the ball on the floor, but like that is not his game. I think the Jaren Jackson comp is a lot better. And listen, like, even if Jaren Jackson is your best case scenario, you can talk crap about that from the perspective like, well, that shouldn't be a number 1 pick. But in this class, look, if you get a defensive player of the year who's like a very important piece, this year they were hurt. They were not a playoff team, but early in his career was already a very important piece for a 50-plus win team who's advancing in the playoffs. Again, like I said, a defensive player of the year. I think Jaren Jackson and maybe a little Evan Mobley-ish, like our Sarr comps. Again, doesn't mean he's going to get to those heights, but I think those are the more comparable players for him as opposed to good defensive players who also put the ball on the floor and give you 20 a game.
Totally, and I think that Mobley is a good defensive comp. If that shot doesn't come around, if the feel isn't really there, then that's more of a Mobley style. And look, the three-pointer isn't at Jaren Jackson levels, but he moves well, and that's why you hear the Giannis comps, because ball skills and movement aren't the same thing. He moves well, but with the ball, he is not a Giannis style player.
No, not at all. Okay, we've talked defense, we've talked shooting, we've talked sleepers, we've talked about some of the guys at the top. Before we get out of here, let's do a little bit of a mock draft here. We're not going to go through all 60 picks. We're not going to go through all the first round. No one wants to sit that long, even though the NBA thinks people want it for 2 nights now. But let's get your lottery mock draft.
Let's do it. We just talked about Sarr at Atlanta. I think it makes too much sense for them to pass up on someone who has a much higher defensive ceiling than who I have at number 2 with the Wizards at Zachary Risache, who projects as an off-ball shooter, but I don't think he has the ball skills and the defensive skills to become an all-around player. Number 3.
And you're sorry, just on Risache, you were also off air. You were telling me about how his numbers, even at youth levels in France and things like that, like never really indicated star potential.
No, he's not a guy that's comfortable with the ball in his hands. And at 6'8" with the 6'9" wingspan, you're not talking about an athletic beast or he didn't test well athletically at the combine. He's not huge. So if you're banking on him being, growing into a three-point shooter with on-ball skills, maybe like Brandon Miller, I just don't think he has that in his game. When a lot of people, it's hard to project him when he's been playing in Europe and a lot of people aren't watching.
Yeah, and with Sarr at 1 too, that I was saying earlier, because of the way he can complement Trae Young, and I never finished that train of thought. But the reason it's funny is because he complements their franchise guy very well, who might not be their franchise guy by the time Sarr starts playing if Trae Young's there. But all right, so Sarr 1, Risache 2, who's 3?
Yeah, so Houston Rockets, they have the 3rd pick. It really would not stun me for them to trade this. They have a ton of young guys that are sort of probably much farther along, and you talked about how this might be a draft where the number 1 guy goes 8 in another draft, and they've really loaded up on top picks. So it wouldn't stun me if they trade this for a vet or maybe package it with another prospect for a star. But if they do keep this pick, I think Matas Buzelis is someone who has a slightly different profile than the rest of their guys. He can play on ball. If he gets a lot stronger, I think he can play the 4 defensively. And if that shot comes around, we're talking about an all-around player who I think can sort of fit that piece of the puzzle in Houston. At 4, the Spurs, they have 2 picks in the top 10, and I think that matters. We talk about Reed Shepherd and his lack of size. If you put him around Wembanyama, that changes everything because Wembanyama makes up for your mistakes. And Reed Shepherd is great positionally, and he's great off ball, but he'll make on ball mistakes because of his size, and Wembanyama is going to erase those. He's probably the best rim protector in the NBA already. It's a perfect fit. If Reed Shepherd's there at 4, San Antonio should take him. At 5, the Detroit Pistons. They've gone young a whole ton. Cade Cunningham needs off-ball help really badly, and Dalton Connect, one of the older guys in the draft, great off-ball shooter, great on-ball scorer. He'll provide complementary playmaking. I think that he could even work at the 3 with Ivy and Cunningham if that's how they want to go. That's where I would go. At number 6, the Charlotte Hornets, I think they're going to go Stephon Castle from UConn. He's someone who his camp has said that they want him to be a point guard, and in Charlotte that wouldn't be the case, but I think that he can be an off-ball guard who can play the point when LaMelo's on the bench. I don't think a team is drafting him to be a point guard, and I think that Charlotte could really use his defense, his versatility, and if that shot comes around, he has one of the better chances of being a star in this lottery. 7 would be the Portland Trailblazers. They already have DeAndre Ayton at center, but I don't think that you're passing up on a big man because of Ayton. No. Donovan Clingan defensively, especially with how the Trailblazers have performed defensively basically in Chauncey Billups' entire head coaching career, and even before that with Stotts. He will immediately fix their defensive problems. He will be able to make up for a lot of the mistakes that their guards will make because they're not great defenders, and I think that's an excellent fit with that core. At 8, the Spurs are back on the clock, and Tijan Saloon, pardon my French.
Literally.
Yeah. He's looked up to Wembanyama. I think he's taken a lot from Wembanyama's game. He's bigger than Risache. His shot is almost at that level, and I think that there's a lot more playmaking upside with him. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see him as the better player between him and Risache, the 2 French wings, in this lottery as we look ahead in a couple of years. 9, the Memphis Grizzlies, Cody Williams. That's Jaden Williams' younger brother. The Thunder have the 12 pick. I'm sure it'd be interesting if Cody and Jalen combine. He's not the playmaker that Jalen Williams is, but they have a similar frame. And if that shot becomes more consistent, you're talking about a guy at 6'9", with long arms, athletic, who could be a prototypical 3-and-D wing, which they kind of missed on with Zaire Williams a few years back. 10, the Utah Jazz. They don't really have a specific team need, I would say. Ron Holland is someone who I think is a blank canvas. He's one of the youngest players in the draft. I mentioned on the G League team he was pretty inefficient, but I think if you sort of fine tune him as a player, the way that he plays, his athleticism, his length, he could become, somebody who is a starter long term for years to come. At 11, the Chicago Bulls, I'm going to sort of prop my guy Isaiah Collier up, who I mentioned. The Bulls are kind of starting from scratch. Kobe White is big enough, and Collier are big enough that they can sort of take turns on ball and be fine defensively off ball. At 12, the Thunder, I think they're going to go Jacoby Walter. He's an off-ball scoring wing from Baylor who struggled with inefficiency, but as a resident college expert, as you called me at the start, Baylor played an extremely tough schedule, a lot of really physical teams. I think one of the youngest players in the draft. Give him some space, give him some time. He can be a great 6'5" off-ball shooter with some on-ball pop. 13, the Kings, Devin Carter, out of Providence, one of the older players in the draft. He shot over 40% from three, a great defender, played the point guard. I'm not sure how many of those things he can do. He's a more refined Davion Mitchell, who obviously they kind of missed out on. But I think that defensively, you're going to need to try to find guys that can play alongside De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis and also space the floor off ball, which is kind of where Davion Mitchell's problems reside. And then lastly, the Portland Trailblazers at 14. I mentioned Tristan Da Silva. I think he has Kyle Kuzma upside, good off-ball shooter, on-ball pop, great length.
Okay, I mean, that covers us for the lottery. I think that covers us mostly for what everyone needs to know before the draft. So the last thing before I let you get out of here, you didn't mention Zach Edey in that lottery mock. I don't think that's too shocking. I mean, most people don't have him in the lottery, maybe creeping close to it. So he's not going to be a lottery pick. Where does Zach Edey go? Where does he land? How far does he fall after winning back-to-back Player of the Year awards?
I'm almost certain he's a first-round pick. I think right after we go to 14, right from 15 onwards, I think there's a real chance, 15 to 25 range. He's not going to slide because someone's going to want to take a chance on him. But I think when you look at the expectations of a lottery pick, because there's that bust potential with his lack of foot speed and that prototype really not fitting in today's NBA, I don't think you're going to see a lottery team want to pull the trigger on someone of his ilk. And then you go past the lottery, there's a lot less pressure. Someone's going to take that chance. I had to say 15 to 20.
Yeah, I think that's about right for kind of what he is and what he can be. I think if he falls like late first round or somehow out of the first round, I think teams are nuts. Yeah. I do not think you can let him fall that far. But anyway, we'll see where he lands. We'll see where all these guys land, and we'll see what teams do. I mean, you mentioned the Rockets, the Thunder with those multiple picks. I think as a team that's definitely ready to win now, might finally be ready to start moving some picks. So we'll see how it all shakes out. Draft is next Wednesday night and Thursday night. It's a 2-night affair this year. We were talking off air. My idea is that they should have, if they were going to do a 2-night affair, they should have just done the lottery on night one. Because the NBA, unlike the NFL, or even the NHL, you don't have all these rounds to fill other days of coverage. It's just round 2, and it's a round where, a lot of the guys aren't even going to play in the NBA. So they should have just done the lottery on night 1. People tune in for it. And then for day 2, you still have the second half of this first round. People still want to see that. But anyway, we're not running it. I'm not Adam Silver.
All I can think of is the fact that Nikola Jokic is now the best player in basketball and was drafted during a Taco Bell commercial, and they just want to make sure that doesn't happen again. That's the only thing that comes to my mind.
Fair enough. But anyway, until the draft, for Matthew Winnick, I'm Joseph Casciaro. Thanks for watching.